What does it mean to you to be in a Christian nation? I'm not sure what I think. I have no idea what you think, but I know some people want to see some very specific things happen in our country, and it ain't pretty. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the meeting house this morning for our 30 minutes of life, politics, and Jesus. I'm your host and your friend, Dr. Dwight A. Moody. I welcome you to the broadcast this morning, and I encourage you to respond in some way. In order to answer my question about what makes a Christian nation, I read a book, and here it is. I've talked about it before. The Seven Mountains Mandate. I'm thinking about doing a whole series on this book. There are 7 chapters in it. I published my review on my website yesterday, themeetinghouse.net. It'll go out in my newsletter this week. I hope all of you are subscribed to the newsletter. But I am going to have something to say today and in the weeks ahead. Plus, I have a couple of things about life, wondering what happened to you this week or what faces you in the coming week. And in politics, it might have been the worst thing ever said by an American president. But who is surprised? Not me, not you. And then we'll go to Jesus. It may be the most important question Jesus ever asked. And we all will give an answer to it. We'll talk about that. That's from, I think, the 16th chapter of Matthew, if you want to follow along in your Bible. Thank you for tuning in this morning to Sunday in the House. It's broadcast number 49. 3 more to go in this calendar year. 3 more questions. But today I begin with not a question from Jesus, but our own question. What does it look like or live like to be a Christian nation? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever cared about that? Have you ever voted with that in mind? A Christian nation, let's say, as opposed to a Jewish nation like Israel. I lived in Israel for a year. It's a Jewish nation. Or suppose a Jewish nation as opposed to a Muslim nation. Have you ever lived in a place like Indonesia or Jordan or Egypt? What did you think about it? Or a Christian nation as opposed to a secular nation, that is, a nation without a dominant religion, if there is such a thing in the world. I suppose what is important to you and me is not the religion, but things like safety and opportunity and access to education, healthcare, and jobs. Perhaps the freedom to travel, the access to news, not fake news, but real news and real journalists. And maybe the most important thing, living around our family, especially the grandchildren. One of the reasons why I'm living where I am is my grandson, Sam. What's important to you? Perhaps freedom to travel, as I said. Or maybe you like sports, either to participate or to play golf or to ski. Or maybe it's music, the ability to go to a great concert hall or to the local pub to hear your friends play. Or maybe shopping online or in person. What is important to you about a nation, about where you live? Well, there's a powerful movement in our country to reshape things so that we can be sure that we're a Christian nation. It's called Christian nationalism. They have a plan to make us a certain kind of Christian nation. They want to outlaw some things like abortion, which they've already done, gay marriage, which they want to do, and immigration, which they're trying to do. They're big on book bans, on restricted roles for women, and the church control of all education at all levels, primary, secondary, all the way up. That's what they want. That's what they call a Christian nation. You can hear all about it in 1,000 podcasts. and read all about it in a document like Project 2025, which I have not read, but I want to read. I'm not even sure it's published in a book. Maybe it is. Or maybe this book, which I've talked to you about before, The Seven Mountains Mandate. Maybe you've heard of it. I interviewed the author before the book was published. He's a professor over at the University of North Georgia, which is not far from here, maybe, I don't know, 2.5 hours drive. And he wrote a book about the Seven Mountains Mandate. Are you familiar with this? Do you know what this is? I didn't know until fairly recent. I mean, like the last year or two. But it's a movement. I want to say it started out as the white Southern resistance to civil rights and racial integration. I remember all that. I was raised in the South. I watched it all on TV. Now, we talked about it in our home, but nothing was ever said about it at church. And of course, I was part of that Southern white culture that resisted it. But this turned into a culture war against abortion, against government interference in everything, including schools, and against liberalism of any kind. The movement eventually adopted as one of its organizing principles this Seven Mountains Mandate. They took over then the Heritage Foundation, a conservative legal group. They took over the NRA. They took over the Southern Baptist Convention. They took over finally the Republican Party. All this has happened in my lifetime and in your lifetime. Now they've seized control of the White House, the Supreme Court, and Congress. So now they control the FBI, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Organization, and all the military. That is why they are bombing little boats, breaking into cars to arrest people without warrants, I might say. And they're shutting down all refugees and immigrants. This is what's happening in America. We want to say to one another, this is stunningly unbelievable. It's shocking to us, isn't it? We keep saying, oh, they're not going to do that, like tear down the White House or cozy up to Putin or refuse to swear in a U.S. representative or seize innocent children in the middle of the night. We think they're not going to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then they do. And we can't believe it. And we think, who's going to stop them? Will the House of Representatives or the Senate or the military or the Supreme Court? So far, nope. All of this Seven Mountains Mandate is just one way that they organize and express their intentions, who they are, what they want. Of course, they want to make us what they call a Christian nation. And this is one version of it. I have another version, and I bet you do too. And I think we'll talk about that over the next few weeks. I may even start a series in January and deal 1 week per mountain and talk about these seven mountains. I'll get back to that in just a minute. They want to seize control of what they call the seven mountains of cultural influence in order to control the country. They don't want just to influence the country. They want to control it. They want to run it. They want to suppress anybody who deviates. So here are these mountains. And the book, which I showed a minute ago, goes into the history of how these seven mountains were identified and how they got incorporated into this right-wing conservative tsunami that is sweeping over the country. But here they are. Number one, government. Now, they don't have an order like as one is more important than the other. But here they are: government, education, business, media, family, religion, and entertainment. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't cover everything. Some people like to include sports in that. It's gotten really big, or research, scholarship. By business, they mean finance. Doesn't include international relations directly. There may be some other places that they overlook. But here's what they mean. Education, by limiting what students can read and write and what teachers can do and teach. Now, some of you are familiar with what happened out in Oklahoma this week. A teacher was suspended in a college. He gave a failing grade to a student on a writing assignment and in a psychology course. The student turned in a Christian testimony instead of reading the material and responding with the content from their psychology reading. The teacher failed her. Her mother is a noted complainer and is very skilled about how to take a very common event, somebody getting a 0 on a grade in college. I'm telling you, it's very common. I've received it and I've given them. But this mother was very skilled in how to turn this into a thing, turning into the right-wing media and make it look like the persecution of a poor little Christian girl. Wasn't allowed to talk about Jesus in her college paper. Poor thing. Well, it got around to the faculty and the dean, and they suspended this teacher. It's not over. There's going to be a fight over this. But this is the way they want to run education. And then by business. Well, to begin with, they don't like any regulations by the government. But the real purpose is to create very wealthy people who will give a lot of money to Christian causes, that is, right-wing causes, of course. On the mountain of the family, they want to limit, if not prevent, divorce. They want to promote birth rates. They want to push women to stay home, forget about a college degree, forget about having a career. We want you to have a lot of babies, white babies, that is. They're nervous about the demographics in the United States, where the percentage of white people has fallen below 50% in the United States. Boy, this scares them. They don't like this because this whole thing is about white supremacy. They want male headship in the family and in the church and in the nation. Men making the decisions, macho men. When you come to the media mountain, they want to repress free inquiry and reporting. They want to empower not the mainstream news, fake news, the president calls it. They want to empower the alternative news and its addiction to conspiracy theories. That's what they mean by the media. Then you get to entertainment. They want, first of all, production of Christian movies that reinforce their worldview, that tell their little stories about white people triumphing over wickedness like secularism and liberalism and gays and certainly trans people. I mean, that's the worst, isn't it, according to them? They want the entertainment to be male-dominated and church-controlled and heavy on enforcement. Religion, that's another mountain. Think of the most conservative church you know. And imagine that is the only option for you on a Sunday or on a television. No meeting house for sure. No Sunday in the house. No preacher telling the president to show mercy. No sanctuary open to homeless people. No woman in the pulpit. God, no. No black man saying, I have a dream. No, none of that stuff. Sounds like the sort of Christian nation you and I want, doesn't it? Is that the kind of place you want to live? This is Christian nationalism. This is Seven Mountains Mandate. This is what is happening in America. Now let's think about what the president said this week. This may be the worst thing any president in the United States has ever said. And I quote, Governor Walz of Minnesota is a grossly incompetent man. There's something wrong with him. There's something wrong with him. When you look at what he has done with the Somalians, which is barely a country, they just run around killing each other. When I see somebody like Ilhan Omar, whom I don't know at all, but for years I've watched her complain about our country. How she's been treated badly. She's an incompetent person. She hates everybody. She hates Jewish people. She's an incompetent person. She's a terrible person. And I watch what is happening in Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, or however many lakes they have. I hear Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions every year. They contribute nothing to the state. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country. Somebody says that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country stinks. We don't want them in our country. I can say that about other countries too. We don't want them in our country. Our country is at a tipping point. We could go bad. We're at a tipping point. We're going the wrong way if we keep on taking garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people who work. They aren't people who say, let's go, let's make this place great. These are people who do nothing but complain. They complain. Where they come from, they got nothing. They come from hell. They do nothing but bitch. We don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it. End quote. That is our leader. Ordained, they tell us, to make us great, to make us a Christian nation. I still have images in my head of all those godly Pentecostal preachers gathered around him in the Oval Office, laying hands on him, thinking God sent him to save America. This is the woman he derided and condemned. I listened to her response. She was very kind to the president. She spoke like an adult. She spoke like a Christian. Which means this is really a good time to turn to Jesus. Think about Jesus, who said, come unto me, all who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus, who said, allow the children to come to me, including the children in Somalia, and do not forbid them. Of such is the kingdom of God. Jesus, who said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Jesus, who said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Jesus, who said, love your enemies, pray for them who persecute you and berate you. Who said, in everything, do to others what you want them to do for you. Who taught us to pray, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us, and deliver us from evil. This is our Jesus, the one we love and treasure and follow. This is the Jesus that's at the center of our religion, our faith, our way of life. This is the Jesus whom Jesus sent to us, to the Jews and Gentiles, to the Americans and the Somalians, to the rich and the poor, to the strong and the weak, to the saint and the sinner, to me and to you, to Representative Omar and President Trump. This Jesus, who said, take my yoke and learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That last phrase is special to me, and I'm going to chase a rabbit here. I read a book once titled The Burden is Light. Have you read it? It's the spiritual journey of a writer from West Virginia who went to Chicago and found work, but along the way, she also found Jesus. Her name is Eugenia Price. Her book is still in print. I've long since given away my copy, like I have many of my books. I hope it has inspired others like it did me. Eugenia Price at some point made her way from Chicago to St. Simon's Island, Georgia. She fell in love with the beaches and the trees and the marsh. She stayed, bought a house. She wrote a series of novels about the islands and about coastal living and about Savannah and other places I'm very familiar with. She died in 1996, about the time Jan and I started visiting the island. We eventually moved there in 2016, bought our own house, and I went looking for Eugenia Price's house. I found it. Not on the beach, but it's surrounded by the marsh. I visited her grave at Christ Church in the cemetery there. I want to say I honor her life. I recommend her book, inspired by this word of Jesus. One final note before we turn back to Jesus. We sold our home on that island last year. And this week, on Friday, we closed on a home here in Travelers Rest. But there's a hitch. You know, when they close on a house, they hand you the keys. This is a brand new house. These were brand new keys. None of the 4 keys that the lawyers gave us will open the front door of this brand new home. None of them work. Still don't. That's a whole nother story, and I don't have time to tell it. I've got to get back to Jesus. Jesus asked this question, you know, a lot of them. I find his questions stimulating and challenging. Maybe you do as well. Matthew says Jesus came to Caesarea Philippi. It was a town in what we now call the Golan Heights at the foot of a snow-covered Mount Hermon. Herod Philip, the governor at one point in the first century, expanded the city and named it after himself. We're familiar with that, aren't we? That kind of thing. Jesus gathered his peeps, his entourage, his disciples, which included men and women, although often only the men are mentioned. He asked them, what are the people saying about me? What do they think? Who do they think I am? It's a great question. It started a long conversation, no doubt, and probably storytelling and jokes and humor. Matthew, who probably was there, summed it up. Well, Jesus, they think you're a prophet like Elijah or Jeremiah or even John, your cousin John, the baptizer. What do you think about all this? Jesus said. What do you think about what they think? Must have had a long discussion about prophets and miracles and rabbis and Israel and what it all meant. Jesus then asked the great question, what do you think? All good teachers ask that question. It is a way of respecting students and disciples and people and seekers and doubters and even defectors. Jesus was not afraid of what people thought and said and wrote. He would not sit well in the new Christian America, which I've talked about earlier. They would have already deported his parents and probably shipped him away. The consensus of the disciples was this: you are Messiah. That is the anointed one. That's what the word means. That's a strong assertion. Messiah was the anointed one of God, a person commissioned with doing the will of God, leading Israel to a return to glory and wealth and influence. That's what they thought about Messiah. In a curious turn in that conversation, Jesus ordered his disciples not to tell anybody what they thought. That is, that he was Messiah. Why? Because it was too political, too threatening, too subversive, too dangerous to him and to them. Eventually, it did him in. It was this rumor that Jesus was Messiah and King of the Jews that got him into trouble with the authorities, the religious authorities and the political authorities. He was too dangerous, they thought, dangerous to the empire and to the temple. They killed him. That's how dangerous it was. Took him out there and hung him on a cross. Maybe they misunderstood Jesus. Maybe not. Maybe Jesus and his message and his vision are threatening to people of power and wealth and status. Kind of people that can rename cities. Maybe his kingdom of the poor and the refugee and marginalized people, and can we say the Somalians and the gays and the trans, was too much for the priest and the governor, the Roman soldiers. Anybody who was considered unclean, it's too much for them. Maybe too much for us. Be careful how you answer the question of Jesus, who do you think I am? Christians have given a lot of high and lofty answers to that question over the years. Son of God, begotten of God, one creed says. Fully God, fully man, another says. I like the phrase simply, the one in whom the Spirit of God fully dwelt. What do you think? The basic Christian answer is Jesus is Lord. We follow him in life and death. We follow him on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. We want to imitate Jesus. We want to follow Jesus. We want to love Jesus. We want to trust Jesus. We want to believe in Jesus and on Jesus for life and death, for forgiveness and hope, for wisdom and courage. More than that, we want to see Jesus in the face and in the life of everybody we meet. We want to be able to say, I see a little Jesus in you. And that makes me want to treat you right, fair and kindly, with compassion. I want to treat you like I would treat Jesus. That's what it means to call Jesus Lord. Well, that's our red letter lesson for the day, and my political rant and a little insight into my life this week. Thank you for joining me today for this 30 minutes of life, politics, and Jesus. Tune in next week. Share this with somebody. Post it on your Facebook page. Let me hear from you. Send me a note. Send me a question. Send me a doubt. Send me a donation. We're inching our way up to 40,000. We're up, I think, a little over 32,000. We're almost there. We need to close out strong here at the end of the year to cover our expenses. I ask you finally to pray for me and for your neighbor and for your enemy and for Representative Omar and for President Trump and for all the Somalians in the United States. They need what we can offer them. Pray for the Somalians still in their country, war-torn, ravaged, poor, desperate, dangerous. Pray for them. Pray for the people around you. God bless you all. I hope you have a great day today. I hope it's beautiful where you are. It's not here. It's so foggy you can hardly see the mountains. Hope you have a lovely day and a wonderful Christmas season. God bless you all. I'm Dwight A. Moody, your host in the Meeting House. Goodbye.